Pipeline Studio is about understanding your workflow and knowing when it's running smoothly. Context loss, fourth piece. At the system level, context loss is not a moment, it is a drift. It begins when explanation lags behind change. Not because anyone stopped paying attention, but because the system continued to move while its understanding stayed behind. Early on, this drift is harmless. The system still remembers why things work. People still recognize cause and effect. Slowdown can be explained. Variation can be interpreted. But as change accumulates, explanation thins. Decisions made under one set of conditions are carried forward into another. Assumptions remain in place after the circumstances that justify them are gone. The system continues to function, but its reasons become outdated. This is how context loss embeds itself. Nothing fails, nothing alarms. The pipeline keeps running. What disappears is shared orientation. Different parts of the system begin operating with different explanations for the same behavior. Work still flows, but understanding fragments. Each group compensates locally based on what they can see. This compensation preserves output. It also conceals misalignment. From the outside, the system looks active. From the inside, it feels heavier. Tasks take longer, but no single task is broken. Coordination requires more effort, but no rule has changed. Every adjustment feels reasonable in isolation. This is the danger of system-level context loss. It hides inside normal operation. Because nothing stops, nothing forces reconciliation. Because nothing collapses, nothing demands explanation. The system adapts by layering effort on top of uncertainty. Communication increases, but meaning does not. Process thickens, but clarity does not. Urgency rises, but insight does not. Each layer added to compensate for missing context makes the original loss harder to detect. Over time, explanation is replaced by habit. People stop asking why things take longer. They learn how to work around it instead. This is not negligence, it is survival. Systems under pressure optimize for continuity. They preserve motion even when understanding erodes. They reward responsiveness more visibly than reflection. At the system level, this creates a blind spot. The pipeline still measures output. It still tracks activity, but it no longer measures shared explanation. As long as work continues, the absence of context goes unnoticed, until pressure increases. When conditions tighten, the system discovers it no longer knows how it arrived here. Decisions feel constrained, but no one can trace the constraint. Trade-offs feel forced, but their origins are unclear. This is when context loss stops being abstract. The system begins reacting not to conditions, but to its own confusion. Slowdown is no longer informative. It becomes threatening. At this point, adding speed feels necessary. Urgency feels justified. Explanation feels like a luxury. This is where many systems make their final mistake. Instead of restoring context, they accelerate away from it. What makes this failure mode persistent is that it does not violate expectations. It quietly rewrites them. As explanation fades, the system recalibrates what normal feels like. Longer timelines become acceptable. Extra coordination becomes assumed. Manual intervention becomes routine. None of these changes are alarming on their own. Together, they signal that the system is operating with less understanding than before. At the system level, this recalibration is dangerous because it masks decline as adaptation. The pipeline appears resilient. In reality, it is becoming dependent on compensation. This dependency reduces optionality. The system loses the ability to respond cleanly to new change because it is already spending effort to maintain baseline operation. Every new demand competes with unresolved context from the past. Pressure does not expose the loss immediately. It amplifies it. When conditions tighten, the system discovers that it no longer knows which assumptions can be safely discarded and which must be preserved. Decision-making slows not from caution but from uncertainty. This is the moment where context loss transitions from background condition to operational risk. Not because the system stopped working, but because it no longer knows how much understanding it has left to spend. Context loss, fourth piece. At the system level, context is not restored accidentally. It is rebuilt deliberately. Once drift has taken hold, local fixes are not enough. Individual teams can regain clarity in isolation, but the system as a whole remains misaligned unless explanation is reassembled across boundaries. This is the defining difference between recovery and compensation. Compensation keeps the system moving. Restoration changes how it understands itself. Restoration begins by reconnecting decisions to the conditions that produced them, not to assign fault, but to recover sequence. When explanation is rebuilt, the system can once again trace cause and effect. It can see which assumptions still apply and which no longer do. It can distinguish between constraints created by reality and constraints created by outdated understanding. This work does not happen at the edges. It happens at the points where decisions propagate. System-level restoration requires slowing the flow of decisions long enough to make sense of them, not to stop progress, but to re-establish orientation. Orientation is what allows movement to become intentional again. Without it, every change feels risky. With it, change becomes navigable. This is why restoration often feels counterintuitive under pressure. Explanation appears to delay action. In reality, it prevents misdirected effort. When systems skip this step, they mistake motion for recovery. They add process, they add oversight, they add urgency, but none of these restore shared understanding. Restoration requires a different posture. The system must treat explanation as infrastructure, not overhead. It must protect time for sense-making even when output feels threatened. It must allow uncertainty to be named instead of hidden behind speed. This is difficult precisely because explanation does not produce immediate results. It produces alignment. Alignment changes how effort is applied. It reduces redundant work. It shortens feedback loops. It restores trust in the system's own signals. Once explanation is reassembled, slowdown changes meaning. It no longer signals failure. It signals load. Load can be managed. Failure cannot. With context restored, the system can decide where to accelerate and where to pause. It can apply speed selectively instead of uniformly. It can tolerate variation without panic. This is how control returns, not through authority, not through pressure, through shared understanding of why the system behaves as it does. At the system level, this is the only durable form of recovery. Anything else merely delays the next loss of context. When explanation is maintained, drift is detected early. When explanation is neglected, drift accumulates silently. The purpose of restoration is not to eliminate drift forever. No system is static. Change will continue. The purpose is to ensure that when change occurs, understanding moves with it. This is what allows continuity without confusion, motion without panic, adaptation without collapse. Piece A described how context erodes when explanation lags behind change. This piece describes how systems regain stability by bringing explanation back into alignment with movement. Together, they define recovery not as a return to speed, but as a return to understanding. That understanding is what allows the system to keep moving without losing track of why it is moving at all. When explanation is treated as ongoing work rather than a one-time fix, the system remains oriented even as conditions change. It does not need to rediscover itself under pressure. Small adjustments stay small. Signals remain legible. Slowdown is interpreted before it becomes alarming. This is how recovery holds over time, not by preventing change, but by ensuring understanding keeps pace with it. This concludes this session. Let what you've heard settle before continuing.